Okay, welcome to Field 1101. Please take a moment to take your attendance. I think the system should allow you to do it now. It's exactly one. Does the password work? Okay. Hopefully you were able to take attendance. Okay. Can I, for those of you who are taking this class from Zoom, I'm gonna need, maybe can I ask one or two of you to remember the online password, because I have a feeling that somebody is gonna come on Zoom in the next couple of minutes and then ask what the password is, and then I probably don't, and then I wouldn't feel like answering because I'll be in the middle of saying something. So please do me a favor. If you are online on Zoom right now, maybe take a moment to write down this password, the online password. Then you can do whoever comes in late a favor and tell them what the password is. Okay. Thank you. Okay. There's a chat message. Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so back to talking about human nature. Okay, so let's see. On Tuesday, we spent some time looking at the looking at the story of Gygax, and we then had a discussion after that. After that, we had a discussion about whether the story is supposed to show that humans are naturally selfish, egoistic. And I think somewhere in the course of that discussion, a very interesting and important point came up, which is that I think somebody, I don't remember who, maybe it was Dragon. Somebody mentioned that somebody mentioned that human nature could still be good, even if we are born selfish. So even if a baby is born selfish, it doesn't actually prove that human nature is evil or bad. Because what happens is that in order for a baby to become a fully integrated member of society or human society, a baby needs to learn certain things. It needs to learn language. It needs to learn certain social and moral norms, right? Like babies, the example we used was that babies don't, when they were born, they don't share food. Their parents have to teach them to share food and share things. So what that seems to suggest is that what you are born with, that which is I'm going to call it inborn. What you are born with is not the same. It's not the same as what is natural. Because it is natural for us, it's natural for human beings to use language, but we weren't born speaking English. We had to teach. We had to be taught how to speak and use language. Similarly, we could say that we weren't born knowing moral and social, etiquette, but so we had to be taught moral and social rules. So we could say that language is natural to us, even if we weren't born knowing language. So perhaps in the same way, we could say that morality, being moral, is natural to us, even though we weren't born, even though we weren't born as moral beings. Okay. So with that in mind, this is actually a good way to. This is actually a this is actually a good way to segue into Chinese philosophy. As I said, today we're going to look at the views of two Chinese philosophers, Mencius and Xunzi. Okay, so let's start with Mencius first. So if you go with this idea, if we go with this idea that being born, what you are born with is not the same as what is natural, then you will see that we have language because somebody taught us to use language. We know social skills and moral norms today because again somebody taught us, probably our parents taught us social skills and moral norms. So the idea is that being born, and this is an idea that is very much a big idea in Chinese philosophy. So the idea is that being born doesn't automatically make you fully human. In order to be fully human, you have to go through a process of education. You have to go through a process of education or cultivation. Yes, you have to go through a process of education and cultivation. You learn language, you learn certain moral and social rules. And it's only after you go through this process of education that you become fully human. Now that might sound a little bit odd to some of us because we have taken too many biology classes and we tend to think of human as just biological thing. But if you think about it a little bit more, I mean, it actually kind of starts to make sense. Because humans, I think we humans are probably the only species on this planet that do not achieve full maturity at puberty. Right? I mean, so if you think of like a dog or a pig, when a dog or a pig acquires the ability, now when it grows to a point where it's able to reproduce, then it basically you consider it a fully grown dog or pig, right? Whereas for humans, we acquire the ability to reproduce more or less at puberty. But you wouldn't consider a 13-year-old or 14-year-old human being to be a fully grown adult. I just realized that some people might disagree with me on that, but I don't want to go into that. So just run along this. So most of us wouldn't consider a 13-year-old or 14-year-old to be a fully grown human being, even though a 13-year-old or 14-year-old in most cases is totally capable of reproducing. And why don't we do that? Why don't we consider a 13-year-old or 14-year-old to be a fully grown human being? I think the reason is because, again, it comes back to this. The reason is that in order to be a fully mature human being, we have a higher standard for being a fully grown human being than compared to pigs and dogs. For us humans, being able to reproduce is probably only the first step. It's only the first step on the road to becoming a fully grown human being. In order to become a fully grown human being, we have to, we have to go through a process of education, and through that process, and then after that education, you enter a profession or you enter a trade, and you are able to you get into a position where you are able to contribute something to society, and then you are in a position where you're not just able to reproduce, but you're also able to provide for the for your offspring. So So, and I think the Chinese philosophers would say that in order to get to the point where you are established in the world and have a profession and all of these things, and you can provide for your offspring, and not just people to come and leave them be. In order to get to that point, you have to go through a process of education and cultivation. Uh, so right, so um, and so the general idea here is that this this whole process, the whole process of going through, in order to think about what is natural to us human beings, you can't just think in terms of what is biologically natural. You also have to take into account this entire process of education and cultivation. We can only fulfill our natural potential as human beings after we have gone through this process of cultivation and education. Um, so in that sense, again, we are different from dogs and pigs because it will be quite nonsensical to say that you educate or cultivate dogs and pigs. So okay, so with that in mind, the Chinese philosopher Mencius basically believes that human beings are by nature, again, think about nature in this big way, not just in terms of biological capacity. If you think of nature in this big way, then you can see why Mencius would think that human beings are by nature good. Human beings are by nature good because we have the potential. We have the potential. We have it within ourselves to become educated and become cultivated, and in this way to become to become people who can fulfill our natural human capacity potential. Uh, More specifically, he would say that all human beings possess. He would say that all human beings possess this thing called the four germs. Sounds really weird. Depending on the translation, it can also be called the four roots. So the human beings possess these four germs, four roots, four capacities, these four things which can be cultivated and which allow us to grow to become to fulfill our potential. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, so what are the four germs? What are the four roots? Okay, have a look at let's have a look at what he actually says. Have a look at the textbook, page, hang on a second. Page 516, 516. Okay, so go to the top of 516. Okay, so he says, this is Mencius, he says, my reason for saying that no man is devoid of a heart sensitive to the suffering of others is this. Suppose a man were all of a sudden to see a young child on the verge of falling into a well. He would certainly be moved to compassion, not because he wanted to get into good graces of the parents, nor because he wished to win the praise of his fellow villagers or friends, nor yet because he disliked the cry of the child. From this, it can be seen that whoever is devoid of the heart of compassion is not human. Whoever is devoid of the heart of shame is not human. Whoever is devoid of the heart of courtesy and modesty is not human. And whoever is devoid of the heart of right and wrong is not human. The heart of compassion is the germ of benevolence. The heart of shame, of dutifulness. The heart of courtesy and modesty, of observance of the rights. The heart of right and wrong, of wisdom. Man has these four germs, just as he has four limbs. For man possessing these four germs, to deny his own potentialities is for him to cripple himself. For him to deny the potentialities of his prince, is for him to cripple his prince. If a man is able to develop all these four germs that he possesses, it will be like a fire starting up or a spring coming through. Okay. Well, let's take it. Let's take it a couple of steps at a time. So, So he starts from, he starts from a very interesting and relatable example. He says, look, imagine if, you know, imagine if you see a child about to fall into a well, you would do something. You will quite naturally do something to save the child, and you're not doing it in order to get into the good graces of the child's parents. You're not doing it because you want the child's parents or your friends to think well of you. You're not doing it because you want to get a reward. Um, and it's even possible that you're not doing it just because you dislike the sound of the child crying. You're just doing it because there is something else. There is something else in you that just makes you, just makes you empathize with the child and, do it. People would call this empathy, and I think that's probably correct. So the idea is that we have already in us, even without any kind of education or cultivation or whatever, we already have in ourselves inbuilt, a certain inbuilt empathy that would make us, save a child from who is about to fall into a well. And that shows that we have the heart of, we have this thing, where are the volume? Okay, we have this thing called the heart of compassion. And you can also call it the heart of benevolence, if that, if you prefer. And then, in addition to the heart of compassion, he also believes that we have three more things, three more hearts, if you will. We also have the heart of shame. Let's see. The heart of, we also have the heart of courtesy and modesty. And we also have the heart of observance of the rights. Oh, the heart of right and wrong. He doesn't say, I mean, right now he doesn't say very much about the other three hearts, but maybe the idea is that he wants us to kind of get, he thinks that we have the idea that if we can believe that we have the heart of compassion, then we should also believe that we have these three other hearts. And these three other hearts are like, he calls this the four germs. So not germ in the sense of something that will get you sick, but germ in the sense of like germinate, right? Like a seed. So he believes that all of us humans, we already have these four seeds, these four seeds of goodness, if you will. So the purpose of but just having these four seeds alone doesn't make you a fully mature human. Yet, in order to be a fully mature human, you have to go through a process of education and cultivation. And so the whole point of education, in his point of view, the whole point of education is to help you to develop these four seeds so that you can, so that you can so that you can become a fully mature human being who can establish yourself in the world and take care of yourself and others and do all these good things. But the point, right? The point is that we already education shouldn't be that hard because there's a sense in which education is not really about changing anything inside of us. It is actually the purpose of education is kind of like if you think of these four things as seeds, education is like adding water to the well maybe education is putting the seed in the soil and then adding water to it and then regularly weeding the garden so that these four seeds can sprout and grow into flowers or trees. So in a sense, education is not when we from this point of view, education is not really, it's not really about doing anything, introducing anything alien into our lives. It is actually, it's just a process of developing and growing what is already there. So yes, so because of that, he thinks that human nature is good. It is good because we are already born with the seeds of of goodness. We just need to use education, add some education, and so that we can bring the seeds to bloom into flowers and trees. Very good. Right. So that basically is his view. Now, as I said, there is this debate in Chinese philosophy between this guy, between Mencius and this other philosopher named Xunzi. I believe that Xunzi is well, I guess they kind of live almost at the same time. They, and this other philosopher has a different view. This other philosopher basically believes that human nature is evil. Okay, what does he mean by evil? He basically, maybe he probably thinks that Mencius is being a little too optimistic about human nature. He basically believes that if you leave human beings to their own devices, they will end up being they will end up being selfish, totally selfish beings. So in a sense, perhaps Xunzi's view of human nature maybe is a little bit closer to my own personal view. Which is that I think that humans are basically selfish by nature. Okay, let's just see what he has to say. Let's just look at what he has to say first, and then I'll say more. I don't want to comment too much. Okay, so look at the bottom of page 516. Okay, so human nature is evil by Xunzi. The nature of man is evil. His goodness is acquired. His nature being what it is, man is born first with a desire for gain. If this desire is followed, strife will result and courtesy will disappear. Secondly, man is born with envy and hate. If these tendencies are followed, injury and cruelty will abound, and loyalty and faithfulness will disappear. Third, man is born with passions of the ear and eye, as well as the love of sound and beauty. If these passions are followed, excesses and disorderliness will spring up, and the decorum and righteousness will disappear. Hence, to give rein to man's original nature and to yield to man's emotions will assuredly lead to strife and disorderliness, and he will revert to a state of barbarism. Therefore, it is only under the influence of teachers and laws and the guidance of the rules of decorum and righteousness that courtesy will be observed, etiquette respected, and order restored. From all of this, it is evident that the nature of man is evil and his goodness is acquired. And then he goes on to say, crooked wood needs to undergo steaming and bending by the carpenter's tools. Then only is it straight. Blunt metal needs to undergo grinding and wetting, and then only is it sharp. Now, the original nature of man is evil, so he must submit himself to teachers and laws before he can be just. He must submit himself to the rules of decorum and righteousness before he can be orderly. On the other hand, without teachers and laws, men are biased and unjust. Without decorum and righteousness, men are rebellious and disorderly. In ancient times, the sage kings knew that man's nature was evil and therefore biased and unjust, rebellious and disorderly. Thereupon they created the rules, the codes of decorum and righteousness, and established laws and ordinances in order to bend the nature of man and set it right, and in order to transform his nature and guide it. All men are thus made to conduct themselves in a manner that is orderly and in accordance with the way. Okay. So according to him, we are born selfish. We are kind of like it's like a tree, right? If you look at a tree, you can't just use the wood on the tree to make the for you can just use the wood from a tree to get to make a chair right away, or a table. In order to get a table out of the tree, well, you got to cut down the tree first, and then you got to varnish the. Actually, I don't really know the whole process, but I guess you need to maybe steam the wood so to make it soft and pliable, and then you need to varnish it, and then only can you shape it into a table or chair or whatever it is that you want. So he thinks that human nature is basically the same thing. When you first encounter human beings in their infancy, they are basically selfish beings. They are basically selfish beings. They are born with a desire for gain. They are born with envy and hate. They probably just want things all the time. So in order to make babies into human beings, we need to bring them through a process. Again, we need to bring them through a process of education and cultivation. But the difference between Xunzi and Mencius is that for this later person, for Xunzi, the purpose of education is not really to bring out what is already good. The purpose of education is to correct that which is crooked. Is to correct that which is crooked, is to bend the original nature, so that from a tree we can get a piece of wood that is useful and that can be turned into things that are useful, like tables and chairs and all that. So the purpose of education, according to him, is to basically did I just say ban? Yes, I did. I said it's basically to ban what is originally crooked into something that is useful, that can become useful to human beings. Okay. I don't really know what to make of this debate between the two of them, because I mean, don't you? I mean, I get the sense. Don't you get the sense that if they were to sit down, I don't know. I actually don't know if they ever met. But if they were to sit down and have a conversation about this whole thing, if Mencius were to start by saying, look, if a child is about to fall into a pond, surely you'll be moved to do something about it. You will be moved to save the child. I'm sure the second guy, I'm sure he would agree. I'm sure he would agree that. I mean, I think most of us will agree that we have some kind of empathy hardwired into us. If we were to see somebody suffering or about to fall into a pond or a well, we will do something. We'll be driven to do. Our first thought will be to do something to pull that person out. So I don't know. Based on this alone, wouldn't this suggest that he's right?
Well, wouldn't his rebuttal be that he was taught that that's the moral outcome, because he could only put himself in the situation that he was in? Well, he would like to be helped as well. So, due to the moral ground of how they were taught, bringing up, like he says, the refinement of human nature rather than just discovering the goodness within oneself, it wouldn't be that he would want to help the child. He would just want that to reflect on him in a sense, not in a how it was said, in a social standing. Like, it's not to show his neighbors that he's a good person, but to himself.
I see. So you are so it may be that he's able to get to the point where he wants to pull the child out of the pond because he's already gone through a certain process of education, and part of the education is to, as you say, part of the education involves cultivating, not just cultivating what you do, but also cultivating a certain self-image, a certain image of who you are. And so the image of, and so basically, so basically you pull the child out, you are moved to pull the child out because you want to preserve or reinforce this image of yourself as being somebody who cares, maybe.
Yeah, the self-standard of your morals. Yeah.
Self-standard
Of your own morals, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it'll be a lot more, the whole thing will be a lot more interesting if you can, if you can produce an example of a child naturally caring about other human beings. Whereas, he actually, you made a very interesting point, which is that he chose the example of a man seeing a child about to fall into the pond, not a child seeing a child about to fall into the pond. It'll be interesting if you were to change the example to a child. I mean, one wonders, right? If you were a child that were to see another child falling into a pond, would he be moved in the same way to try to pull the child out? Or will he just go, okay, whatever?
Might be in the same sense of seeing them in their own shoes. The child saw a man screaming, the child was just like, I screamed too. That's obviously not a good sign if you don't help. But if the child saw someone in a predicament where he could not put himself in those shoes, but it would be good to help, the child still wouldn't help because he doesn't understand. He'd still have to be taught that.
Yeah.
Probably a bad example, but like a child not wearing a mask right now. He won't ever see the effects unless he gets slightly ill, but there's people dying. He doesn't know the certain gauge of it. He'd have to be taught what is good and what is morally right in this time. Just like falling down a well was probably a big hit in the 1600s.
Yeah.
Whenever wells were made.
Yeah. I mean, so most of us in this situation, we would think of the golden rule, right? What is it? Do unto others what you want others to do unto you, something like that. The thing is that when he says that somebody is moved by compassion to pull the child out of the well, is this a matter of the example is kind of not very clear because when he is moved to do that, to pull the child out of the well, I feel that he could be moved by three equally possible candidates. The first possibility is that he's moved by this very natural feeling of compassion with the suffering of the child. So this natural feeling of empathy. So that's one possible. That's the first candidate that is moved by this natural feeling. The second possible candidate is like what Sayer has suggested. Maybe he's motivated by wanting to wanting to act in a way that conforms to his self-image. He has learned to see himself as somebody that cares. So he's moved by a certain self-image of himself as somebody that cares. The third possibility is that, and maybe the third possibility is, maybe that's the same as the second possibility, I don't know. But the third possibility is that maybe he understands the golden rule and he basically is thinking, look, if I were in the same position as the child, I would want to be safe. So I should do unto others what I want other people to do to me. So I should go save the child. Okay, so these three possibilities. It seems to me that if he's acting according to number 2 or number 3, if he's saving the child because he wants to conform to a certain image that he has of himself, then it would seem that this can only happen. This can only happen after he has already gone through a process of education, right? think similarly, if he's number three, if he's motivated to save the child because of the golden rule, again, I think that can only happen because of after he's gone through the education. Because a child, right? A child wouldn't know what a golden rule is. It's only if you will have a case of number one, which is that he's moved by this pure, this pure feeling of empathy, this pure feeling of compassion for the child. Only then can you say that. Only then can you say that that he is, is moved by something that comes before any education. And if you can somehow prove, I don't know how to do it, but if you can somehow prove that a child, now even before he's had any education at all, already has this heart of compassion, already has this natural feeling of empathy towards other human beings. If you can somehow prove that, if you can somehow prove that a child can have a feeling of empathy towards other human beings before any kind of education, then I think only then can you show that he is right and Shinzi is wrong. Yes. So only then can you show that it's possible to have to be moved by compassion to save other people even before you have had any education. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to know whether that's possible. Perhaps, well, this is I'm making a different point here, but I also wonder, I wonder if he's being a bit harsh in saying that human nature is evil, because if you think about it, if he is right, even if he's right that a child is only naturally motivated by the desire for things and by maybe envy. I'm not sure if children can be motivated by envy, probably. Actually, they can. I just realized that. I just remember that children can be motivated by jealousy. Sometimes you see siblings, for example, even very young siblings, they get kind of jealous when their parent gives more attention to one sibling than the other. They probably don't even know it's jealousy. They don't have a name for it yet, but they have it, right? So yes, but even if all of that is true, it just means that human beings are by nature, selfish, by nature self-centered. To be selfish and self-centered, I don't know if that counts as. I just don't know if that counts as evil, because I don't know. It seems to me that from my point of view, to be evil, evil requires a bit more premeditation. If you murder somebody, that's evil. It seems that evil requires more premeditation. Whereas in this, if you are in a selfish state, well, that just means that you haven't been taught to not be selfish. You haven't been taught to control your selfishness and your desires. I don't know if that's necessarily evil. Maybe the way this works is that there is good, which is a case in which you have been taught to control your selfishness, and then there is evil in the sense of you basically premeditate and carry through a whole bunch of things that do harm to people. But then maybe selfishness is in the middle. Maybe selfishness is a state. It's kind of like a neutral state in which in which you can either become evil or you can become good. If you are taught to, if you can be taught to control the selfish impulses. So, yeah, well, but maybe but maybe his point is that, even if human beings, even if you say that human nature is selfish, uh, maybe his point still stands, which is, and the point is that, in order for human beings to become good, one has to go through a process of education to correct or control all these selfish tendencies. Maybe that is the idea. And then I think this is where it gets interesting because he said, I think when we read just now that, the reason why we have all these rules and institutions and all that is because there are all these ancient sage kings that in their wisdom were able to come up with these rules and rules of human conduct and all these institutions to educate us so that we can control our selfishness and become good people. So that we can, we can bend our nature so that we can become useful pieces of wood, so to speak. But he also said later on that the sages, the sages weren't originally good. The sages are also human, just like us. They originally were probably also evil. They were only able to become good as a result of all these things, virtues that they acquire through education. Okay, so here's the thing. Um, I was originally selfish when I was born. I'm assuming that is correct. I was originally selfish when I was born, and then as a result of benefiting from the education, as a result of learning all these rules of conduct and all these institutions that were laid down by these ancient kings, sage kings, I became good. I think. Okay, I became good. But if these ancient sage kings, if they were also originally by nature not good, right? If they were originally by nature evil, I guess the question is, how did they come up with all these? How did they come up with all these rules of conduct and institutions that allow them to become good? In other words, if the first human beings, if the first human beings were evil, and remember that the Chinese philosophy doesn't believe in God, so there's no God. So if the first human beings were evil and there is no God, if the first human beings were evil, how could evil beings come up with rules that allow them to become good? Suggestion?
Motivation and necessity, because they don't like to get hurt, so they implement rules that don't allow you to get hurt, and then they want food, so they implement rules on how to get food, but how to give food to everyone without anyone dying, because that in turn would have someone hurt. And it's just what's necessary to sustain life and how to continue reproducing. I mean, that's coming from a pretty base standpoint. And that's probably how rules have evolved, because the society grew bigger, just how one tribe, all they really had to care about was not dying and getting food, grew into houses and infrastructure, and then they had to implement more rules.
And the reason why they're not screwing each other over is because it's probably because they discovered that it's easier to get food, to hunt animals and all that if they work together rather than screw each other over. Makes sense.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, say kind of the same thing I did the other day of just, I think it's a natural thing, a natural product of a society or living in a group is being able to work together, and that, like if you look at monkeys and stuff, they figured out how to be in groups to work together to help each other, but then, there's also, different groups. It's not like, one whole race, they actually have individual groups that just naturally form. I think it's a pretty natural thing to happen, even though you're not born in
Yeah, I just find it quite, I mean, I get that picture, but it's just, so, okay, so in the beginning, we have a bunch of, the first human beings were probably just kind of apish creatures who decided that, it's better to, if you're going to hunt animals and survive as a group, yeah, it's probably to work together with each other and maybe recognize a hierarchy. Maybe the strongest of the apes will become the king or something, and then they follow the king. So you get something like that is basically kind of like planet of the apes. It's just that I can't really see. I have trouble seeing how you get from Planet of the Apes to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I mean, sorry, I know this is like a cartoonish image, but I mean, if you have seen if you have seen something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, you can get a sense. You get a sense that Chinese culture or Chinese civilization is not just. I mean, of course, there's hierarchy, but it's not just this apish culture where you just recognize the power and authority of some king ape or chief ape. There is a very well established culture. So I guess the question is, I guess it's hard to kind of imagine the sheer need for survival and the sheer need for cooperation that will get you to Planet of the Apes. I don't know how it gets you to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Yes.
Could be niche.
What?
Could be niche. Because during these tribes and during the revolutionary period, we would be looking for leadership. So what to do next, what shouldn't be decided based on free flow, because there's always going to be disarray. There's always going to be a leader. And then a leader implements some personal beliefs. And so one leader's personal belief could have been a lizard, and then that evolved into dragons. It's just really developmental. I mean, it won't necessarily help survival, but it's not going to affect, it's not going to make people die. So these niches that the leaders implement over time will affect culture, and then hundreds of years later, oh, you got dragons, right? Again, sorry, I'm freeballing that, I don't know.
Yeah, there could be what's going on. I mean, yeah, I mean, and then what happens? What happens also is that somewhere along the line, and this is something you study. You study a lot in political science. Somewhere along the line, in order for a leader so there's something selfish here going on, and what's going on is that when you become the king of the group or something, you don't want the kingship to just end with yourself. You want your son to be the king as well. But in order for people to buy that, to accept that, you kind of have to come up with a story to explain why it is that your family should stay in power. And so it's kind of complicated, but I think the long and short of it is that one Chinese, one idea that one thing that is quite a common thing in Chinese thinking is this idea that whoever's in charge has the mandate of they call it the mandate of heaven. So the idea is that I get to be in charge not just because I'm stronger or I have more military power than you, but because but it's because I somehow have more virtue than you, and because I have more virtue, there's this thing bigger than me called heaven that approves of that gives a stamp of approval to my being the leader, and the story is that my children have also been well brought up, and so they also have the virtue. And so heaven also gives my child the stamp of approval to be the next king or emperor or whatever. Once you have this story, then you kind of it kind of gives you the starting point to build to come up with other things. Like maybe you can then come up with certain institutions. And you can come up with certain, cultural practices and such to support those institutions. And then before you know it, you have something that is there is more than just power. You know, you have, before you know it, you have a system of kingship that is based not just on power, but also on the legitimacy of the king to be in power. And the legitimacy, at least according to the story, is based on the, you know, the virtue of the king. And the king has virtue. The king's virtue is proven by the fact that heaven has given it a stamp of approval. Yeah, so there's a story anyway, which is a kind of a neat story in its own way, because that also gives if you are a dissident, if you want to stage a rebellion against the king, that also gives you a reason to stage a rebellion, because then you say something like, the king has lost the authority to rule because he no longer has the mandate of heaven. And then you try to come up with reasons for why you think that the king has lost his virtue or whatever. And then you say, I should be the rightful king. And then you stage a rebellion and hopefully you win. So, I don't know, bringing it in a way. It's really interesting actually, because along with this idea of the mandate of heaven, you also get the idea of, I don't know exactly how the two are related, because my knowledge of Chinese philosophy is actually lacking, but let's just say that there is a, you know, so there's this thing which is called the mandate of heaven, and then along with the mandate of heaven, there is this other idea called the way. So as I say, I don't really remember how the two are supposed to be related. But the general idea, I think, is that you know, if you are, remember, I said earlier that in order to be fully human, you need to go through a process of education and cultivation. And the idea is that it's only when you have gone through a process of education and cultivation that you can fully realize your human potential. And when you realize your human potential, then you are in harmony with the way. And if you are in harmony with the way, then you're much more likely to have the stamp of approval from heaven, the mandate of heaven. Yeah, and so so basically this is more or less how the system works. So based on all of this, the idea is that there is something that is greater than you as a person, and that thing that is greater than you is not God, but it is the way and the mandate of heaven. And the idea seems to be that this way or the mandate of heaven, it basically governs what it governs the rules of conduct and the code of the institutions. And so if you and so even though the sage kings were not originally, even though they were originally human and they are not gods or anything, even though they are originally human, they did manage to come up with this system that more or less sustains itself. And the idea is that in order to be a good human being, you got to work to overcome your original selfish nature and be in harmony with the way. So that's more or less basically how it works. So it seems that, so to bring it back to this, this debate between Mencius and Xunzi, I think they are both in agreement. They are both in agreement that education is necessary for you to cultivate your human potential. Maybe their disagreement, perhaps their disagreement lies in what education is supposed to do to your original nature. right? Because Mencius basically believes that humans are basically good. I mean, I don't know if he's right in thinking that, but he believes that. He believes that humans are basically already good. They already have the four germs, and the purpose of education is just to add water and cultivate the four germs. Whereas this guy Shinsu basically believes that we are basically selfish creatures, and the purpose of education is to straighten that out, so that we can we will not continue to be crooked pieces of wood, so that we can become useful pieces of wood. So I think that's what I think that's the difference between the two of them. Let's see if okay, those of you who are out there in the world of Zoom, any thoughts on all this? So going back to the movie we watched last week, Parasite, I guess those people, I guess the kings they are probably pieces of wood that weren't straightened enough. Would you say?
Pieces of wood that weren't straightened out, you said?
Yeah. Maybe somewhere along the line, somewhere along the line, the straightening process didn't work out so well for them, and some part of them remain crooked.
I suppose you could say, again, it's kind of the standard restriction of their own moral code. They should be ship-shape in their own sands of life. They're living in a basement, so they're doing what they can to survive. I'd say that's ship-shape for them. Are the kins just, the parks, are the parks just a unstraightened piece of wood on a pedestal?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think what this whole thing, I think you brought up something, you bring up something interesting, because it may be that the parks are just as crooked as they are. It's just that they happen to be in a economically better place, a pedestal, so to speak. It could be that all of this doesn't take into account. So all of this basically assumes that if you go through a process of education, if you develop all of these things, then you will find yourself, you'll be able to establish yourself in the world, and presumably it doesn't say anything about earning a livelihood or anything like that, but presumably you won't live in a basement. But we do live in a world. We do live in a world in which there are all kinds of things that are beyond our control. We do live in a world in which bad things happen to good people, right? You could get an education, have a college degree, and all that, and still be struggling even to get a job as a security guard. So it could be that it could be that this thing doesn't take into account this. It doesn't take into account the fact that that we do live in a world that is very much how do I say this? I mean, the simple way to say this would be that we live in a world that doesn't always reward human cultivation and human effort. Interesting point. I mean, if you go with Marx, Marx basically says that, he says many things, but one of the things he says is that a lot of the suffering in this world is basically due to the fact that a rather small number of people in this world happen to own the means of production. And if you don't own the means of production, then you just own labor, and you basically are condemned to use your labor to make just enough money to feed yourself and your family. And And so if you are in a situation where you don't have the means of production, then then perhaps going through going through the process of education wouldn't be enough. Wouldn't be enough to allow you to live a flourishing and good human life. Because then even if you have a college degree, you still have to worry about getting a job and earning a paycheck. So having a college degree doesn't prevent you from becoming a wage slave. And these guys didn't seem to worry about that, because they seem to assume that if you have education, you'll be able to establish yourself in the world and everything will be okay. Yes.
Just from what I'm talking to Mencius and all, it almost seems like Mencius doesn't even talk about people being evil at all. He just is going on about how people are always good. Actually, well, now that I think about it, he did say something about people learn to be evil, I think. But I don't know, I just didn't really see much of Mencius talking about evil. He just kept on talking about, people are born good, kind of a thing, and it just doesn't seem right because we know evil happens.
I think he did not. I think he said at one point that he said something about being crippled. So I think he's basically saying that if you fail to become good, that just basically means that you are in a sense crippled. Okay, I realize that that's not very true. Basically, to put it really simply, I think he believes that to be evil is simply to fail to become good. So there is, if the process goes according to plan, if the process of education goes according to plan, you should be able to develop. You should be able to develop morally and spiritually in the right direction, and then you become good. So if you are evil, that means that there's been a failure of the process. That means that there's a failure of the process, and you have. I don't know whether it is that the process has failed you or you have failed the process, but either way, there's a failure somewhere, and you have failed to become good. So evil, according to him, is simply the failure to become good.
Seems weird saying that, evil is because you haven't become good, but yet he's also saying you're born good. And so it's just I don't know, doesn't quite sit with me.
Yeah, maybe that means is that think of the idea of germs or seeds. So you are born with the seeds of goodness or the germs of goodness. But that by itself doesn't guarantee that you will become good. Right, because you need to go to education to water the seeds. That it's sprouted. But you can imagine that maybe people with some kind of unfortunate circumstances fail to get the education that they need. And then if that happens, if you fail to get the education that they need, then the seeds are not watered, and then eventually maybe the seeds will die. And then you fail to become good. So if you look at it that way, then to him, being evil simply means there's been a failure of the education and you have failed to become good.
Wouldn't that just align both these teachings?
Sorry, align with what?
This just align Mencius and
Yeah, okay.
It's just nurturing the seeds and straightening the stick.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the end.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, in some ways, it's hard not to see the debate between the two of them as being, it's almost like I don't want to say the debate is not important, but it's almost like a debate over certain details. Because, as you said, Shinzu will just come along and say, okay, so at the end of the day, it seems that you probably agree with me. Whether you call it a failure of the seed to sprout or whether you call it a failure of the process of straightening the wood, I mean, in the end, it's kind of a failure of more or less the same process, right? Yeah, so, but they do have one thing in common, the two of them, and they both seem to believe that, if somebody goes through the educational process, then he will be able to become a virtuous person or a good person, and they don't say this outright, but they don't say this, very explicitly. But what they're assuming is that if you become a good person, then you'll be able to establish yourself in the world, and the world will take care of you. To them, I think to them, the idea that you could go through a successful education and become a good person, and still have to really struggle to provide for yourself. That seems like a very alien idea to them, because, well, they probably lived in pre-capitalistic times. They didn't have to worry about oppression in a Marxist sense, which is really interesting because we're not going to talk about Marx in this class, but Marx basically believes that to be human, in a way, it's kind of he agrees with them on some points. He basically believes that to be human is not simply to be a biological being. To be human, you have to be able to to be human is to want to create. And create is very broad. It could be creating art or creating a life that you think that is in accordance with your vision. But basically, to be human is to be a creative being. And the reason why capitalism is such a bad system, according to him, is because capitalism. When you go work for somebody, what you are doing is, you're giving 40 hours of your time every week to creating something that is not your own. I mean, right? Suppose I go work at a factory. I am sitting in a conveyor line, making something, and that's something that ends up that's something that is made will eventually become the property. Well, it basically is the property of the factory, right? And then they sell it and all that. So I'm basically devoting my time to creating something that is not my own. So what capitalism does, the reason why capitalism is so harmful to human beings is because it robs us of our creative nature, potential. So I'm trying to relate whatever I just said about Marx to all this. I think they never thought about it. This problem did not occur to them because they did not live in a world in which there is a capitalist system that could rob human beings of their creative juices or creative potential. It just occurred to me that you could see what happened in the movie in The Parasite as a kind of Marxist critique of society. These guys had to live in a basement. I mean, they started off in a basement, probably through, I mean, you could say that they could get more education and all that, but generally, I mean, at the beginning of the movie, they were able-bodied people, right? Who probably had plans and dreams of their own and all that. But due to a bunch of unfortunate circumstances, they found themselves in a situation where they had to like fold pizza boxes just to be able to keep the Wi-Fi going. And folding pizza boxes is not that different from working in a factory. You're basically producing something that that is not your own. And then they try to, in order to overcome overcome this situation, they try to swindle their way into the Park family and all that. And in a way, that just makes the situation worse because when they get employed by the Parks, their material situation is better, they have more money, but they're still making something that is not their own, right? If you work at the house as a housekeeper for the Parks, you're still devoting 40 hours of your time every week to doing something that is not your own. So it seems that you just cannot get out of this capitalist cycle where whatever you end up doing, even a job that pays more money, you're still doing something that is not of your own creation. Okay, I realize that this is really depressing. And you probably weren't expecting to hear a Marxist critique of everything. But I'm just trying to explain. I'm just trying to explain why it is that these people seem to be missing something. Education is not cultivation or education or whatever you call it. Doesn't seem to be enough to make good in today's world. Okay, it's almost time, but okay, again, those of you out there in the world in Zoom, any thoughts, comments about any of this? Okay, so here's the deal. Hopefully, hopefully you know that I posted the questions for next Tuesday's writing assignment on the Moodle. So please have a look at it over the next few days, prepare answers to it, and then we will have the writing assignment on Tuesday, and then we will move on from there. Okay, so thank you very much. It's not quite 2:15, but it's okay. I think sometimes you deserve to an early day. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you.